Let's look at other variables. As far as variables are concerned, other variable types that we've not looked at, we have not seen at variables like bool, we have not seen variables like map, we have not seen variables like object, we have not seen variables like list. Now, these are all other, and the list continues. These are all other variable types. So, depending on the type of variable that you want to create, you can use a particular variable type. Now, for a Boolean variable, you're looking at a variable that has possibly two values, maybe true and false. So based on the given variable that you want to use, you can, or based on the condition that you actually want to attain with the given variable, you can look at the various variable types that are existing. We have the list variable that enables us to store our variables in the form of a list. Now, assuming you have a variable like the EC2 instance type. Now, the instance type can be T2 medium, the instance type can be T2 large, the instance types can be T2 X large, and so on. So this value or this variable can have many types, and you can now store a variable that will take into consideration all these instance types as a list. And for you to declare a list variable, you actually use the type list. So once you're specifying your value, once you're specifying the type of the value in the variable file, we have it as a list. So the type of the variable is list. And now with this list variable, you can give it default values. So if I was to define this variable in a given resource creation, I'll have type equals to list, and then now I'll specify my default. Now for you to specify default values in a list, you actually put them in a square bracket. Now as you put in a square bracket, you give the individual values in that variable. In the case where you're specifying list of EC2 instances, your default will be T2 medium, T2 micro, and the list continuous. So this is how you can specify default for a list of variables. And now once you specify these variables as a list, you can reference these variables based on their place values. So we have that the T2 medium is the first variable, the T2 micro is a second variable based on their place holders or based on their positions, and the position starts with 0, 1, and the list continues. So if you have 10 of those values in a list, you can have them referenced based on their positions. Also, when you are specifying the list, you can also specify the type of the data that is stored in a list. So assuming that you want to be storing the string data in a list, you specify it as list, and then you say string. In this case, any value that is stored in this variable must be a string. We can also store our variables as object variable, where in this case, the variable is having default values that are listed as an object. And now for an object-based variable, we can have a variable say AMI ID. Now, given a variable like an AMI ID, you can have the AMI ID for an Ubuntu instance, you can have the AMI ID for a Linux instance, and a list continuous. So if you define a variable AMI ID where you want to choose between an Ubuntu and a Linux instance, you can make use of the object variable. And for you to define that object variable, you give the default, and then you specify the individual attribute within the variable. Assuming that we're doing that for the AMI IDs, we are going to do a default. Maybe we can have the Linux, and then we give the AMI ID of the Linux instance. We can have Ubuntu, and then you give the AMI ID of the Ubuntu instance. So this is how you define the AMI IDs using the object based or using the object variable. And now once you specify with this format, you can now call this variable based on the individual attribute. So if you were to make a call for this variable in your main.terraform, you will have ami equals to var dot ami id, and then now you specify the value, in this case Linux or Ubuntu. So you might have Linux, which specifies the individual or the exact value of the variable that you're making reference to. Let's go to our VS Code and test how to work with this variable. Once you are in VS Code, you create a new folder. You call this folder 6 variables, and then we call this others. We create our main.terraform. We create our providers.terraform, providers.terraform, and then we create our variable.terraform. Once you do this, for the providers, we have providers. Our provider which we are using is AWS, and then the region we are using US West 2, and then the profile we are using the default profile in this project. So we use our profile here is default. Now we come to our main.terraform. We are creating a resource, and the resource is AWS underscore instance, and name of the instance now we give test instance. With this test instance, the key values, the key attributes for this instance, we have the AMI. We have a key which is the AMI. Now the next attribute that you have is the instance type. The next attribute we have is the tags. So let's tag the instance. So we have tags, and then we give the tag the name, and then we give it a value. Now we are going to input these values using our variable. So we come to our variables in Terraform. We are going to create the first variable using list, which is a variable for our instance type. So we have a variable. This variable name is instance type. We want this variable to be a list, and now in this list we want all the values in this list to be a string. Now the default values that we can have for a string, the first value that we can have is the, let's start with the t2.micro. Let's see, if you want to use another instance, we can create t2.medium. If you want to create another instance, you can use c5 large. So we can continue creating as many values or as many variables as possible. And now if you are to refer to these variables, this is the variable in the position 0, this is the value of this variable in position 1, this is the value of this variable in position 2. The next variable we have is a variable for the EC2 tag. And now we are saying that with this variable, we want to be able to list or to tag the instance based on the environment. So we tag our instance in a list, and then the list is a string. Now the default values that we can have for this string, we can have this instance either in the prod environment, or this instance in the test environment, or this instance in the stage environment. Now the last variable that we are going to create is the variable for the AMI ID. Now to create this variable, we are making use of the object, and for us to do that, we give the default of this variable to be an object. And now with this, we are saying that for the Linux instance, the value should be a given AMI type. For the Ubuntu instance, the value should be a given AMI type. Now, for you to get the exact values, you go back to your AWS console. For us to get the exact values, we come to our AWS console, and then for an Ubuntu instance, you copy the Ubuntu AMI ID and you paste in the Ubuntu. And then for an Amazon Linux instance, you copy the AMI ID and then you paste for the Amazon Linux. So now you are saying that if this variable is called, if you want to use the Linux value of this variable, is going to give you a Linux instance. If you want to use the Ubuntu value of this variable, is going to give you the Ubuntu instance. Now, once you have this, we now come back to our main.terraform. We want now to call the AMI instance. How do we give the AMI values in our variable.terraform? Using the default value that is an object. Now, for us to make a call for any of these instances, we come to our main.terraform. Now we want to pass it the value. So the value of our AMI now becomes the var dot, what was the variable we created? It was the AMI underscore ID. And we now have to specify which of the instances which we want to use. And for us to specify which of the instances we want to use the Ubuntu instance in our variable, because we created a variable here and we said that the AMI ID can have a value Ubuntu. So if you come back to your main.terraform, we have var.ami_id and then we give it the value Ubuntu. The same thing for the instance type, we pass the variable value var.instance type, and now the instance type we can reference. We come back to our variables files. Now if you are trying to create this instance with the T2 micro or T2 medium or T2 large, you can specify them using the placeholder. So we are going to be doing that using a T2 micro, and for you to do that, you just reference it based on the position of the string, and the position here is a zero position. So you come to your main.terraform and then you reference this instance type to the zero position. The same thing, we come to our tag, we use a variable var.tags.ec2 tags, and then if you come back to your variable.terraform file, you see that the ec2 tag could be prod, test, or stage. So let's use the stage, which is the second position. So you come here, var.ec2 tag, and then use stage, which is the third. Once you do this, you see we are going to create an ec2 instance with the AMI ID Ubuntu that's been specified in our variables files with the instance type in the zero position. And if you come to the variable, the instance type in the zero position is the T2 micro, and then with the tag ec2 tag in the third position, which is the stage tag. So for us to continue, this should be the second position, not the third. This should be the second position, not the third. So for us to continue, we run our Terraform init and then we check out the configuration. So you come to new terminal, new terminal. You see we have a problem. You check out the problem. So it's a missing argument and an argument definition. Oh, this is supposed to be square braces. Once you have this, you can open your new terminal and then you cd into the directory, cd into the seed, and then we run terraform init. Once terraform init is complete, let's run terraform plan. And when you run terraform plan, you now see 1 resource to add, 0 to change, and 0 to delete. Now if you look keenly, it is making use of the credentials which we pass. So it picks the AMI of the Linux instance which you pass, which was 8. You can take note 832. If you come back to your variables, 832 corresponds to the Ubuntu instance, and in your main.terraform you refer to that Ubuntu instance in your AMI call. So this is basically how, if you run Terraform apply, it's going to create this EC2 instance. If you look at the tags, we gave the tag of the second, we gave the tag of the value in the second position. So if you come back to variables here, this is the tag of the value in, so this is zero position, the first, and then the second. So the value of the tag in the second position is the stage. That's why you see the tag that is given here is the stage. And if you also check the instance type, you'll see that it is using the instance type that was specified, which is the T2 medium. So this is basically how you can use list and the object string to be able to manage variables in Terraform.